The broadcast is now starting and passive listening mode has been enabled for all participants. Please note that this workshop is being recorded and may be shared with others. The participant list and chat are private, meaning only the speakers and moderator can see the messages and participants' names. Log out at any time if you do not wish to continue under these conditions. Good day and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 43 of our mindsON RBQM workshop series hosted by Syntegrity's My RBQM Academy. I'm Tamara, the Academy's operations manager, and I'm happy to have you with us today. Let's get artificial intelligence doing the work in risk-based quality management is the topic of our 60 minutes workshop today. We will mix this session with interactive brainstorming and live polls to get everyone involved and exchange perspectives. Our speakers, I'm happy to welcome Brian Barnes as a guest speaker. Brian brings more than 20 years of leadership experience in clinical research and pharmaceutical development with a strong focus on RBQM. At BioNTech, he serves as Director of Risk Management Strategy in Global Clinical Development Operations. In this role, he is responsible for strengthening enterprise-wide risk governance and advancing RBQM practices across the organization. Brian is also actively exploring how AI-supported approaches can be implemented in a practical, compliant way to improve clinical oversight and operational efficiency. We are very pleased to have him with us today as our guest speaker. Hello, Brian. Keith Dorricott. Keith runs an independent consultancy specializing in RBQM, issue management, metrics, and KPIs. In addition to his workforce integrity, he consults with other pharma, CRO, and vendor clients, as well as the Avoca Quality Consortium. Keith is known for his ability to explain the complex topics clearly. Good. And before we start, here a brief introduction to the handling of this webinar platform for all those who are new to our workshop. Later in this session, I will activate a toolbar for our brainstorming activity. You will see it on the left side. Click on the icon with the mugs and pen. Select the T in the box to open a text box. Click anywhere on the whiteboard, type in your ideas, click OK to submit, and your input will appear anonymously on our whiteboard then. Your questions and comments are very welcome throughout this session here. Please use the chat box in the right, select the tab Moderators, and send us your messages throughout the workshop, please. And in a moment, I will share some quick troubleshooting tips for the audio connection in the chat. And to modify your audio settings, click the gear icon in the top right corner and scroll down until you see microphone. There you can choose from a list of connected devices. Yeah, thanks very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your attention. And I would say, let's start now. Keith, the stage is yours, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Tamara. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And a particular thanks to Brian. Yeah, I think we're going to have a good discussion today. I don't think I need to read through that. So that's essentially what's already been said. The only thing I would say, just to reiterate what Tamara has mentioned, is please do put any comments or questions into the chat, select moderators and enter it there. We'll be tracking that. We'll be following that as we go. We're very interested to hear what you think, and we'll try and respond and bring that into the discussion as we go. I will give just a little bit of background first. It's a fast changing field, as we're going to hear again and again, and there are bits and pieces coming from the regulators now. What I'm going to show you is some pretty new stuff. So this is from January. You may have come across this. There's 10 guiding principles that have come out from the EMA and the FDA, guiding principles of good AI practice in drug development. Worth taking a look at. I think it's only a 3-page document, so it's an easy read, but really interesting to see what their principles are. I've listed them here. Number one is human-centric and ethical, thinking from an ethical perspective. And then we've got our favorite one there that we're used to, a risk-based approach. So using a risk-based approach with proportionate validation, risk mitigation, oversight. I'm not going to read through all of these, but it's definitely, if you haven't seen it, it is absolutely worth taking a look. It's a good starting point for how the regulators are thinking of AI being used in a GXP environment. The other one I wanted to point to, which again is December, January sort of time, the MHRA, so the UK regulator, updated their inspection dossier, and they added this area here, artificial intelligence and machine learning. And again, it's worth taking a look, especially if you think you might be inspected at some point soon by the MHRA. Worth taking a look at this new piece here, and what it's saying, because it's quite detailed what it's asking for, as is common actually in the what the MHR inspectorate requests for an inspection. So a lot of detail there. Another quite interesting addition to that's been brought out by another regulator. Way back in the mists of time in terms of AI, and I know when Brian and I looked at this before as we were preparing for today, he said April 2024. That's like the medieval times in in terms of AI. We looked, Johan and I looked at using ChatGPT, and you can see we tried two goes using 3.5, and then we used 4.0. We'd previously had a draft sort of protocol outline, and we had gone through what we thought, that is with people at the webinar, what we thought together the critical to quality factors were, and that's what these are here. And at the time, back in say the midst of time, as we used ChatGPT, the different versions of it then, and of course there's more recent versions now, it didn't do a bad job of coming up with things to help discuss that would lead you to these. And you can see that's the orange, the green, and the purple. So we were pretty impressed, and I'm sure Brian is going to tell us that it's things have improved further. We also carried out a brainstorming. What risks can you think of when using AI for RBQM? So this is what people said at the time. The biggest thing that seems to me here, well, number one is, well, we're not too sure about the quality of what comes out of AI, but almost the biggest thing it seemed to me was the concern about critical thinking, people not thinking beyond what they get. So they get the response and then they say, okay, that's fine, and just chuck it into a spreadsheet or whatever, and on they go. That to me seemed to be the biggest concern. We also asked how might AI be used for RBQM. It's interesting, we asked in the future there. So, but it really is being used now, and we'll probably find we're going to do a poll in a moment to ask you who is using AI for RBQM now or plans to. But at the time we asked this question, and you can see lots of different areas that people were thinking that that AI could be useful for, specifically focused around RBQM. So in the poll, there's a couple of polls. So the first one is whether you or your organization use AI in RBQM. So that's our first one. And there's just one answer. I mean, of course, it's a yes or no, but there's a little bit more to it, some more detail, which I think hopefully be interesting to see your responses.
And thanks, Keith. And I think while we're waiting for some of those to come in, I think a couple of pieces that jump out, and maybe the same question is going through some of the audiences, is what are we talking about when we say use, and what are we talking about when we say AI? So we'll kind of see how that maybe influences part of the poll, and we'll talk more in detail about that now. So I see some of the results coming in, but just kind of wanted to highlight that I think that the use in the word of AI can be a lot of gray.
That's a great point. And AI is so many things, isn't it, after all? So There's so many different types. Yeah. Great.
So I think, go
That's
ahead if you
I
want
think
to
that's
share. I
presented
see a
now.
couple of interesting trends developing. Yeah.
Yeah, so we've got A, B, and C are the yeses, and D, E, and F are the no's. So that's the first thing to look at. So we've obviously got, at least of those responding here, more than half are on the yes, but we've got a good chunk there for in the no's, a bunch of not applicables as well. And within the yeses, we've got, I guess it's, yeah, the biggest bunch is actually the ad hoc use, isn't it? And then the rest of them are sort of pretty much evens all the way around. So it's the ad hoc use is the biggest group, more using than not using. But
And
what
that's
do you think,
I
Brian?
think that's really exciting, Keith. Yeah, and I
Mm,
think, even when you were kind of highlighting that early 2024 conversation, I will say this is a pretty big jump, which I think is exciting. So I'm excited to see the ad hoc. We'll talk a little bit more about how I'm kind of thinking of ad hoc, but nice to see that there's been a lot of our industry colleagues that are starting to think about and implement these types of approaches.
definitely, definitely. Great, thank you. Then let's go to the next poll. So this is about concerns about using or potentially considering the use of AI in, again, focused on risk-based quality management. So we've got it select up to 2.
And I think the other part is we're seeing some of the responses come through, and I think a part of our conversation today will be concerns, and as we kind of think of it as us being risk practitioners, is balancing the concerns as part of the process development. And I think that's a big piece that we'll talk about, is understanding maybe where some potential limitations are and how to think about and design effective processes to mitigate those concerns. So I think there's concerns that we have across all of our activities, but how do we build and support processes to mitigate those? So it'll be interesting to kind of see our group's thought of those concerns, and can we develop ways within our processes to help mitigate those.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of thinking about it. After all, we are risk practitioners, aren't we? So the other thing is just to say, we're putting here the concerns. I deliberately didn't put one on the advantages, but we know there's lots of potential benefits to the use of AI. So I don't want everyone to think that we're being negative. I mean, you're going to hear the conversation. We're certainly not being negative about it at all. But we want to, we want to think about some of the concerns. Of course, we do. So. Great, thank you. Yeah, so we've got the biggest grouping is on accuracy of output, is what we're seeing, followed by validation. So validation of the AI tool, and then we've got lack of critical thinking. So that's interesting. It's I would say it's changed a bit, at least when we look at that brainstorm we had. We did see accuracy of output, but mostly it was focused on the concern around critical thinking, or potential lack of critical thinking. Whereas now we've got accuracy of output as number 1, and validation is right up there as well. Interesting, which is perhaps from E6R3, perhaps, where there's obviously a lot more about validation of tools.
So one way I kind of think about the options here, and I think we'll have a piece of this as our conversation, Keith, is kind of looking at the traditional people, process, and technology, right? So if you kind of bucket these options into people, process, and technology, which ones are the ones that we can influence and which are the ones that we can't influence? It's not surprising, that accuracy of output is number 1. I think that's a technology piece. But what I've been really interested in and happily surprised, if that's a word for us, is when you flashed up that first early kind of 2024, we were looking at, GCP 3.0, 3.5. Now we're in 5.2, which is astronomically better. And so, we'll see. Maybe we'll see in the questions kind of concerns about hallucinations. We'll talk about those, but I think the quality of outputs are only going to get better. And one piece that I kind of talk about with our teams is the quality of output today will be the worst that it ever gets. And I think that's the exciting piece, is it's only getting stronger and better. And the speed in which that is happening Granted, I haven't been in the industry a super long time, a good deal, but I have not seen anything develop quite at that speed, which is both a good and a bad. So I think that's some nice responses and definitely give us some conversation points for today.
That's great. Thank you, everyone. Really interesting. Yeah, and again, we see just how fast it's moving. So you need no further introduction, Brian. Let's sort of get straight into the discussion. I wanted to start, and maybe this gives you the opportunity actually to talk about what even we mean, or perhaps what you mean by AI. But where do you use AI in risk-based quality management? What sort of things do you do?
I think it's a great way to start. And let me first kind of share a couple of disclaimers, right? And so for me, and we kind of put it there, is for, at least for me, I'm kind of speaking on behalf of the work that I do and the work that we do, outside of our work. But I think the other piece is, and I think an important part of, as we start the conversation, is understanding the tools and the technologies, right? So we may reference certain technologies, and most specifically, it's probably going to be Copilot. I think from my experience, that's the platform that's most available to colleagues. And I do want to highlight that because I think, and this is just having joined a couple of conferences along the way, is privacy and security is got to be first and foremost, and both from our organizational and our corporate lens, and then also from the participant safety and so forth. So I just wanted everybody to kind of keep that at the forefront, that we're not proposing that our clinical trial protocols are taken and put into unsecure spaces. So I think there are technologies and opportunities available to do it in a secure way. And I think that will be the way that we're kind of prefacing here. So again, the one that I've seen most commonly is Copilot. And that's kind of the one, if we say that, is just from kind of an organizational level, the one that's been approved that I'm most familiar with. So I think looking at AI and kind of putting that definition out, I think, you talked about the regulatory perspectives, and I think it's exciting, one, that we're starting to see some regulatory conversations happening. I think that's needed. But we are seeing differences in that interpretation of AI. So if we look at FDA, US FDA, and kind of MHRA and EMA, in my lens, the definition of AI is slightly different. And so maybe that's another conversation. But just keeping an eye on the use of definition of the term. And I think the other piece that I've in having conversations with colleagues, a lot of people think that AI has to be some type of curated data set or some type of algorithm or platform that does that. Yes, I think that is AI, but I also think of, and this kind of gets into the first and the biggest piece that I'm most interested in AI is in an augmented fashion. So kind of using tools such as Copilot is kind of the way that we'll talk about it today, but using it in an augmented fashion. I think that's very heavy and important. And we'll talk about that, I think, throughout the day, of what does an augmented approach look like. And the reason I talk about an augmented approach is, and this is where I like the US, the FDA and the EMA principles for a number of different reasons. One, they were super short, as you highlighted, Keith. It's 3 pages. So if we look at R3 and talking about what's critical and focusing on critical, I think they delivered that, which was fabulous. And it was from a principle-based perspective, which I think, as we'll talk about today, setting up an operational framework within an organization has to be a principle-based approach rather than a prescriptive approach. So with that, I think the first 2 were the ones that made me most excited. One was risk-based, was number 1, actually was number 2. Number 1 was a human centric, so human by design. And I think that is the first way that I look at an augmented approach, and the way that that I've talked about it with a lot of the colleagues is looking at AI as a teammate. It is a partner with you. And I think for me, thinking of AI, and again, I'm using AI as kind of a tool, as a teammate, helps me to think of it as a partner. And I think of it as a teammate as just like any other colleague that is a part of our team or is a part of our organization, is you have to treat it like a human. And I'm interested in this, in the response that I'm going to get from the colleagues. A lot of people are good and bad about thinking of AI as a human. But I think for me, thinking of it as a teammate and a partner helps me frame conversations and interactions better. And we can talk more specifically in examples here in a moment, but I treat it as a teammate, and I think of it as a partner with me on my daily tasks. So again, I'm not leaving parts of AI to do things that I'm not putting an eye on, or using my subject matter expertise to critically think through. So again, I think the short answer for me is how do we think of it as a partner or a teammate in risk-based quality management, and using an augmented approach.
Well, make sure I can find the mute button. I need AI to help me with that. I was going to say, yes, I've heard people think of it that way, and think of it actually as an intern is what, but interestingly, is what people said to me, is think of it as an intern, because it's not someone you necessarily would, I'm calling it a person now, someone that you necessarily would give the task to and leave them to do it and then just, you know, off they go. And it's more that you've got to have the oversight, you've got to review. It's that idea of human in the loop. So if you think of it as an intern, where you wouldn't just let them go off and get on with it and start sending emails off and doing all sorts of stuff, you would, at least at the moment, with the level it is, you'd want to carefully oversee and just make sure it was making sense. I mean, have you heard that sort of way of looking at it too?
Yeah, 100%. And we can talk a little bit more as the day goes through, but I think getting back to your first question of examples of what does this look like? So we talk about using it as a teammate and using an augmented approach. What does that mean? And I think for me, what started to kind of click through when I started, the light bulb went off for me. And as I talk to people and they kind of go on that AI adoption journey, it's definitely a light bulb event. And when you're sitting there and you're kind of seeing the outputs that are coming through, people's eyes light up and they're like, wow, I had no idea it could do this. And for me, that experience was in the risk assessments. And kind of being a practitioner and looking at risk assessments, I think in industry, going back to specifically risk-based quality management, the idea of a risk assessment has been our crux for 10 years. And so, you know, when I started to look at, okay, what are the pain points of why have we not been successful with implementing a risk assessment, and kind of taking that lens of what regulators are talking about is just doing a risk assessment. And I think for me, what started to click was kind of what were those pain points that we were experiencing. And I think the biggest one, at least in my experience, has been just getting cross-functional stakeholder feedback and perspectives, getting everybody in the room and talking. It's a very labor-intensive conversation, and everybody's busy without their day-to-days, but getting them to see the value. So kind of working through some of the earlier models, and it's only gotten better, as we kind of talked about a moment ago, is getting different perspectives. So as I was starting to look at protocols, and I was, again, just kind of doing some of the early kind of quality by design, looking at critical to quality factors and looking at risk assessments, I could simulate different voices of different stakeholders that I would normally talk to. So if that would be our medical team, if that would be our biostats team, if that would be my data management or my clinical operations, I could start simulating those conversations with them in this virtual space. And so that, again, that's kind of where, for me, the idea of the teammate started to kind of resonate, was bouncing ideas off of the tools to say, you know, act as if I'm a data manager with 20 years of experience, you know, on this therapeutic area, analyze this protocol and ask me 3 questions that you would see would be important. And so we'll kind of talk about maybe, you know, some tips and practices along the way, but asking for feedback and generating questions is part of that teammate approach, rather than saying, I'm just going to take what it gives me and moves on, but asking the right questions, engaging in a conversation, just like you would a colleague, and then having that help generate the output. So for me, that was kind of, and I still use this a lot in my risk assessments, is that risk-based quality management simulation is before I even can go to the team or cross-functional teams, I've already gone through the exercise virtually with my teammate, and already have a kind of a plan. And then we take that to our our cross-functional stakeholders who are those subject matter experts and say, hey, here's some of the original ideas that we've had. Let's pressure test those against what we know is our knowledge base and see, are we on track or do we need some differences? And that's where I got really great feedback from our teams, where if I came to them with some trouble, with some critical thinking, people love to poke holes in things, love to give you feedback. And when I could come with a quality conversation, I got a lot higher quality output back. And so that's kind of what my light bulb moment was with AI, and kind of looking at it in risk-based quality management, was kind of the speed and quality of the risk assessments that were coming out.
Because when we do a training, and we, you know, in the green belt that we have at Syntegrity, and even the black belt training, when we do the training, one thing that we talk about is that challenge of, do you start essentially with a white sheet of, you know, no risks, and start asking a team, you know, what risks do you see, or do you start with a list of risks that, you know, are common across protocols, or similar quotes protocols, or same therapeutic area, or whatever? And there's a debate that goes backwards and forwards with that. But it seems to me what you're saying there is actually AI can come in and give you a sort of a middle way, in a sense. It can actually come in and quickly help with bring some sort of expertise, intern level perhaps expertise, if you can have such a thing, but something that can then be put out to people to review, rather than that white page, that blank screen, which of course is almost a bit intimidating, and people don't know where to start with it. So that's a really interesting sort of middle way, it seems to me, that you can use AI for.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a great example. And so kind of double clicking a little bit more into, you know, ICG-6R3 and quality, you know, critical to quality factors, I think help with that. So kind of for me, as in terms of how we start to operationalize that, is coming to those conversations with a planned approach. And I think that is focused on critical to quality factors, number one. And I think having distilled some of that noise down into a really tangible conversation piece helps. And kind of maybe the analogy that I share with teams, that as I'm working through that, and I think it was maybe Stephen Covey talked about the old kind of experiment where if you have a glass jar and then you have rocks and you have sand, which one do you put in the glass jar first? Do you put the rocks or do you put the sand? So I think the example is, you got to put the rocks in first and then fill in with the sand around it, is the way that you get the highest value. So for me, that's kind of how I look at bringing critical to quality factors and really the use of AI is getting the right rocks in that glass first. Then I can fill in those other supporting pieces around those. And I think that's kind of what for me AI helps with, is distilling that down, finding those core critical to quality factors. We can talk numbers on a different one, but really helping the team identify those, and then you have really focused, quality-driven conversations to support that. So for me, just getting over that initial hurdle of coming to the conversation with a really digested out approach, which has a good basis, is that. So I think for me, to close that loop, is taking that principles-based approach that we saw from the regulators, right? Is human in the loop, is both myself as a practitioner, and then my trial teams are those subject matter experts. They are built into the process to get us the feedback. And we are taking a risk-based approach to that. We're focusing on those factors that are going to be the biggest impact. So that's kind of where we shared at the beginning, is how do you start to build some of those principles and practices and considerations into the processes that are supporting it, rather than relying solely on a technology.
Great, thank you. An area I wanted to just think about, perhaps, and just ask your opinion of, because we did that poll a bit earlier about some of the concerns. I mean, and you briefly mentioned hallucinations, but I mean, that's not the only concern, I suppose. But the number one concern people gave us was accuracy of output, and then validation of the tool. And I wonder if you could talk about those two, and give your thoughts around those. So
I think the first one,
with accuracy.
Yeah, I think, well, the accuracy number one is, I think, the good one. And that's kind of where I share is, bringing a human-centric or a team-based approach is, yes, you always have to review and verify the output, right? So I think that has to be brought into that. And I think that is where our skill sets, and I'm going to kind of think of us as industry, is where we bring into that, is our experience, is what we're contributing. So maybe it's a bigger conversation of what people are is AI going to replace jobs and all those kind of conversations, but there are pieces that can't critically think through, and that's the years of experience and knowing what good is and what good isn't. And I think that's kind of, for me, what shifted is now I come into more as an oversight reviewer, right? So I'm able to review the outputs and say this is consistent with what I would expect or not. And I think the other piece that we talked about and there is coaching it like a teammate, where if I'm not getting the outputs that I expect, I need to coach it back to give it, rather than saying this is a poor output, I'm just going to quit and move on. Is leveraging in and coaching your teammate to become better. And maybe this is another kind of philosophical side, but I actually think that that's the advantage of our role as kind of practitioners now, is it's, you know, myself and my AI tool, that is the advantage that I can contribute, because I've coached it and I have different trainings that I've given it to create certain outputs, right? So now it is a supercharger for me, where I can bring myself and my teammates to that conversation. So I think that's a key piece of, you can't just outsource this to anybody and say set it and forget it. It definitely incorporates a human and that subject matter expertise to coach and fine tune the models to that specific application and output.
The knowledge of the process of RBQM, of risk assessment and prioritization and control and so on, and that's still, you know, that level of knowledge is still needed by someone, hopefully by multiple people within an organization. But what AI is doing is sort of helping to sort of supercharge, I think is your word, supercharge that whole process and bring ideas in. And I see there's a couple of comments coming, so thank you. Do put your comments into the chat or questions. So someone's saying, yeah, accuracy isn't such a huge problem, as long as you do review the output, as exactly as you're describing, Brian. Very much
so maybe one output on that, and that's a great one. And so to kind of dovetail into the process design, and one piece that kind of clicked on me a moment ago, and this is a little bit of dating myself, but I kind of was thinking back to when we had paper CRFs, right? When we used to do double data entry on paper CRFs, right? So, and I'd always thought about it. It was like, you always do double data entry, but why was that a part of the process that was developed? And there was a risk of transcription, and we've talked about this for ages in SDB and SDR, but there was the risk of transcription. So as part of the process, you bring in a double data entry to kind of mitigate that process. And so, as we were talking about before, is understanding and doing a risk assessment. That's why I love a risk-based approach to AI adoption, is thinking about it. And maybe this connects into the conversation of validation, is what is the intended use of your application? And so with that intended use, understanding what is the criticality of that data and what is it going to be used for. So it's the same principle of quality by design, is you can't treat every AI application the same. And what I mean by application is use case. You have to take a risk-based approach and do a risk assessment on that use case to find out where the failure points are. So if I'm using it for just QCing a document or helping me generate an email, I'm not going to go through the same validation process that I'm going to do if I'm generating data for a regulatory submission or output. Those are two very different use cases. So looking at that, I'm going to build two very different oversight layers into that process. So connecting it back to, you know, the ECRF completion guidelines, I'm not going to do a double data entry, maybe if I'm having AI run through my emails. But what I could do is, if I'm having an output that is going to be, that data is going to be used in a submission or something, I may run it through different models. I may run it through 2 or 3 QC prompts to second guess, or not second guess, but QC the outputs, right? So it's the same idea and principles that we've done in industry for years, is do a risk assessment on your process, understand where the potential fail points are, and then build a risk proportionate approach to your AI adoption. So that to me is a key piece of the validation and kind of the implementation of AI. Is it's not a set it and forget it, is do a risk assessment, understand where your fail points are, know where your use cases are, and build fit for purpose use case examples to support those. And I think that to me is the next generation of how we build it in, is not a one size fits all.
Yeah.
And again, part of that risk assessment is demonstrating why you have the different mitigation layers in, and how is that protecting the quality of the output that you're expecting.
Well, isn't that fascinating? Yeah, that's a really interesting insight, I think, because it's almost as if we are, in the area that we all are in, risk-based quality management. We're perfectly positioned to think, because we're thinking in terms of the process and the protocol and the risk, and what are the risks and how do we prioritize and mitigate them. And what you're saying is, we'll actually think of this is just part of the process of going through it. Well, then what are the risks of this? And I think it helps me, again, just sort of thinking it through as you were talking. If I think of AI as that intern, then the intern can help to generate output. But depending what the intern was being used for, if it was going to be going to a regulatory authority, I'd have a very, very different approach to if it was, well, it's just being used to not just, but it's being used to come up with some possible risks for others to review as part of this overall process of RBQM. So
maybe let me kind of play, and I think you asked a question a moment ago, and we can connect back to one of the biggest questions I get is hallucinations, right? Is one of those. And so I think first and foremost, if we look at ChatGPT and those, 5.0 was astronomically better than 4.0 in terms of hallucinations. But one piece that I found very interesting, and I can go back and get the exact quote, but there was an actual Nobel Prize back from University of Washington a year or so ago about an experiment or an idea where it actually was generated from a hallucination of AI. And so, they were kind of brainstorming with, this problem, and what they thought was a hallucination actually became a different way to think about an approach. And people are like, I've never thought about it that way. And so again, they test and verify the output, but by challenging the paradigms of what we traditionally think, I think is one of the most powerful things about AI. And so again, what is the intended use case? Am I using it as a brainstorming partner as part of my risk-based approach? It can come up with a lot of very different ideas, which I think is a great part of the risk assessment, is because I'm sure all of us have gotten in a room with a team, and we've done a risk assessment on 5 trials before. We become into that same routine of, we're just going to copy, rinse, and repeat that same thing. And we don't think about what's novel and unique. And that's kind of where I love to use AI, is it actually is always eager to give you a different lens. And so again, as those practitioners can say, hey, I never thought about that from this lens. We're QCing that output, and we're like, I never really thought that could impact that. And when we start to unpack those, that to me is where you build a better quality by design, using it as a teammate and a critical thinking partner, rather than just a set it and forget it output. So hopefully that kind of maybe is a good use of, like, don't be afraid of hallucinations. Just know how to manage them.
Not with how we're using it, because it's not as if it's generating a report that's then going to go and be published. That's not what we're doing here. And it's, again, I'm sort of thinking of the training that we do when we train teams on risk assessments and that whole process. One of the things that we say is it's actually very valuable to have somebody in the room who doesn't necessarily have experience in that protocol, maybe even that therapeutic area. And the advantage of that is they can look at it with fresh eyes, perhaps, and ask things that perhaps others in the room wouldn't, and maybe, but it might be they ask apparently silly questions, but it's almost as if we could say, well, actually AI can do it. I mean, is that not like an hallucination in a way? You could come up with a person can come up with some pretty weird stuff. It might be useful. People might bounce off it and say, oh, well, that doesn't make any sense. But actually, what about this? It sets the brain going. So it's really interesting. We've got a few questions coming in, and it's really about some of the practical aspects, because one of the things that you've been talking about, Brian, and I know that you do this, is you talked a moment ago about sort of training the intern, as it were, training the teammate, the AI teammate. And so it's not just a case of putting in a prompt or putting one bit of information, putting in a prompt, getting the response back, and there you go, off you go. There's much more to it than that. I wonder if you could just sort of talk us a little bit through that, because one of the questions we've got is with Copilot, and what can I put in to get the output? What should I put in? We can't just copy paste the entire protocol, can we? Or can we? Or
A couple of ideas, right? And maybe this will kind of bridge into another one of my strong interests is how do we start teaching people about AI, right? And we'll kind of make that a broad one. So maybe if you're okay, Keith, we can kind of delve into that, because I think that's a very interesting, both from RBQM, but also from kind of us as knowledge workers as we're moving forward. So what is that? So we kind of talk about the Copilot is, definitely work within your institutional model, right? I will say, from my experience and what I've seen with use of Copilot, which is one of the advantages of using that Microsoft product, is it does stay within its dataverse, right? I'm not a technical engineer, but there are safety and safeguards that are in place with Copilot and the institutional knowledge that's there. And depending on the different subscription models that are available, and this is a little bit more of a down piece or a different part of kind of the risk assessment, is the ability to access anything in the dataverse has been changing for me in terms of when we look at risk assessments and historical knowledge or understanding what is available and what types of conversations have happened. As I'm doing risk assessments, just being able to go into and really query, and I think as us in industry, taking transcripts of most of the calls is becoming a little bit more common, at least in my experience. So I don't need to be on every meeting, but I can still leverage conversations that happen in meetings. And I think this is where I get very interested in the efficiency side, is how many risk assessments can I manage and trials can I manage myself, where I don't need to join every call. But if I can have a transcript and write the right prompts and queries, I can get and identify risks and knowledge, historical knowledge, that's super impactful for that lessons learned conversation. So maybe that's a separate one. And that's kind of where I do like the Copilot component is the accessibility of data within that secure dataverse space. So I think we were kind of talking initially about change management, right? How do we start to teach people these ideas, right? I think maybe you shared the question was about getting the right prompt. And so for me, I think there is a change management component about teaching people how to use AI. And I think that's a big piece that I'm, like I said, kind of really passionate about, is how do you teach that and what is it? I think why that's interesting for me is because in my experience, AI adoption and getting stakeholders across the organization isn't typical change management. We all talked about change management in RBQM. It's like, oh, it's a change management thing. It is an AI, but it's a different change management problem. And we can't tackle it with the traditional ADKAR type approach where, it's just training, teach people that thing. The reason in my experience that isn't working is because of what we talked about at the beginning, is the speed of change, right? So if I'm teaching a colleague or teaching a team just to use a new CTMS or an EDC or whatever that is it good and bad, it's a validator. You click here, you get this output, and you design processes to do that. I think the key piece for me and getting kind of that new piece is how do you teach people to think in an AI mindset? And this goes back to the risk assessment, is thinking it as a teammate and getting people to engage in a conversation. And so I have 10 tips that I work with internal teams on to kind of help talk about those 10 tips. And I think the first and foremost is what I think is super interesting about AI is use AI to make AI better. And what I mean by that is, a lot of people are like, I don't know how to get the right prompt. And so I say is, have you asked AI to help you with your prompt? So it's kind of like, oh, I hadn't thought about that. So there are different agents within, the Microsoft space that they have a Copilot prompt, but you can do this in any type of thing, is to go through. And I am a huge fan of voice and dictation. And I'm not a strong writer, but I like it. Maybe we can tell from this conversation, I like to talk. So if I can just turn on the dictation and just talk about like, what do I want to do? Like, what do I want it to do? And then I ask it to help me with the prompt. And most importantly, to ask me questions to get a better response. I can come up with a very high quality prompt very quickly. So I think that's kind of the first piece that I work with teams on, is teaching people that mindset. That's not ad card change management. It's like, how do you interact with these models to get the output?
It's the practical. It's the practical piece, isn't it? Because, and that's something we hear a lot about, almost the quite high level stuff about AI. And as you say, is it going to take people's jobs? And I mean, there's so much there. But what about the actual sort of day to day of actually using it to, and the challenges with that, but also, there's some of these tips you're giving us here, which I think are invaluable. Yeah.
And I think part of, for me, and so we kind of talked about use AI to make AI better. The second one that I talk about is, and we kind of talked about it, is it's a conversation. And I think, at least in my experience, and I think we see this a lot in kind of process failures, is it usually takes about 3 iterations for things to get better, right? So if I'm asking for some type of output, I'll ask one question, I'll get an output back, and I'm like, that's good and it's bad. But I think the key piece is you can't give up on it. And I think that's where the teammate idea comes in. It's just like, if I'm coaching a colleague, I need to tell it, what did I like? What didn't I like about what I gave it? And give it a good example of what good looks like. And then if I come back with those 3 pieces, the second response back is a lot better. And typically by the third one, it's very good.
And it's a much faster cycle, isn't it, than a true teammate would be, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's where you come into the coaching of your teammate, and it'll learn. The models learn, and as you give it knowledge, it gets better. So teaching people that it's not a one and done exercise of, and I think unfortunately this is kind of the space that Google gave us with their UI, is they think of the chat. It's called a chat, right, for a reason, but it's not a search bar like we are used to with Google, right? I'm not just searching for something in there. Yes, you can do that, but it's a chat, it's a conversation. So engage with it like a conversation. And that's why I love dictation, is I just brainstorm, spar with it, and come up with ideas. So it's teaching people that mentality.
And I see there's a couple of comments here I can see. So someone's saying, I often have arguments with AI and question the responses when I'm not convinced. So that's sort of what you're saying, is have that conversation. Oh, I've lost it. Oh, there it is. For our AI systems, you have learning from your prior work, or do you have to train them each time anew? It sounds like you're just constantly building, but it sounds like you've possibly got sort of more than one model of an AI, as it were.
Yeah, and again, I think there's a lot of complexity. And again, I have an interest in technology. I'm not a technologist or engineer by design, right? And I think there's different conversations about the role of agents and how agents come in and agentic. But for me, and again, I'm just going to kind of talk about, at least with Copilot, is you can teach it memory, and that's kind of where it's part of it, and that's kind of where just using the thing of remember that is part of your response. It'll go into a memory queue. And so that, to me, is how I start to create a teammate for me, right? It knows the things I like, it knows the things I don't like, and it have historical examples of what those are. And I'm able to interact with it. So the short answer is, and I've tried this, and this was kind of, maybe we talked about validation at the beginning. A scary piece of AI was, if 2 people come in and give it the same answer, I get very different responses. And a lot of people are like, oh, it's a problem. This is never going to work for us. And again, I kind of came from the side of, is it? Like, it's no different than if I ask the same question to 2 different teammates, I'm going to get a different response. And so to me, it's that is good. I need to be able to control that space. And that's kind of where learning and iterating and be a teammate for me is I can kind of coach it to be good, right? And so that is the value that I think we can all bring to AI, is the value of creating a more holistic lens, right? So that's kind of one of those, is coach it like a teammate, make it your part of that process. So don't be afraid if you don't get the same response from 2 different people. I actually think that's an advantage.
Yeah, and I think there's this is an interesting suggestion someone's got here. So obviously they're using it regularly. What helps to get AI to get in-depth critical thinking is to now and then ask, are you sure? So to ask AI, are you sure? I suppose, how do you know? How have you come up with that response, which is an interesting one. And there's another comment in about so it's almost like, why Copilot? as opposed to, for instance, AI that might be within other platforms. Like, I mean, Integrity has one where you can upload a protocol. I mean, why is there some reason why you would prefer to use Copilot, or is there have you not looked at those? Or
I think for me, my short one is use case, right? And that's where I don't want it to be a technology is, and I will say, uh, for Copilot if my intended use case is having it review specific clinical trial data that needs to be focused, and I need a validated output. I think technologies that such as Integrity, and I know there's others in the market that is the intended use case, and they've been validated to do that, is the right tool for the job.
yeah,
And so, yes, those are great. What I'm kind of talking about is kind of the other day-to-day activities. And so for me, and again, I have to follow kind of our IT technology and security infrastructure. So that's kind of, again, why I'm saying Copilot is I think there are other ones that are out there, but for me, that's just where my closest day-to-day operations are. And
yeah,
that's just because I
yeah,
have to, and I do operate within our ecosystem.
of
So
course, yeah.
so I think the short answer is definitely appreciating the use case and understanding what is the best tool for that job. So yeah, so if I'm looking for and I need a high quality like a KRI, and we really haven't unfortunately got to those, right? Is using AI to get into KRIs, they're great, right? But I'm going to use a tool that's validated and the use case is intended to give me that lens. Whereas if I'm just going through a risk assessment and need a sparring partner, I may not need the level of validation and
It's
security
almost a
that's there.
brainstorming to us to help with brainstorming in a way at that stage, isn't it? Or that sort
Mm,
of use case, I suppose. How question I had was how would you encourage our listeners today? How would you encourage them to? Well, I'm saying to try it out. I mean, clearly a lot of people are trying it out, but to continue and to perhaps develop their use of AI, or those that haven't tried it yet, to sort of put a toe into the water.
mhm.
What would you say to sort of encourage them or give them some tips and advice?
I think the best way, and that's a great way to kind of end at the beginning, and this is the first thing, and we can kind of, again, I didn't get through any of the top 10, but I think it comes from trying. And I think that's the biggest piece is a lot of people, at least from the experience of working with colleagues, is they're afraid of trying. And part of trying is you will find things that, and I shouldn't say that I have not found an opportunity where AI hasn't been able to help me, but just try it, right? And I think that's where it comes from a leadership lens and creating a culture of experimentation within the organization. And that's kind of one of those that as I work with my colleagues is before they come to me with a question, I don't want to sound bad, is I'll ask them, have you run it through AI? What did you get? And not saying that we're going to trust what they gave, but I want to see kind of what the prompt was that you started with. What did you like and not like about it? And then how can we work together to fine tune it? So I think that's creating a culture of experimentation and trying, which I think is a key part of it. And just getting shots on goal. And I think that's kind of when you use it more and more and putting it to use in situations where you're like, I don't know if this is going to work, that you're like, oh, it can help me with X. I never really thought about that. And that's when the things start to unclick and you're like, huh, what if I do this? So I think the first one that I say is for me is try, right? Try within your organization's use limits. But for me, it's consistently up next to me in every task that I do. So I think it's getting into that routine of kind of having it to be a true partner, and that's just getting used to interacting with it. So the best way to do that is just before you try anything, to say, hey, I wonder if AI could do it, and then give it a go. And then again, try a couple of iterations, and I think you'd be surprised.
Really interesting. I'm trying to see. There's no more questions I can see coming. Do you drop any questions into the chat? Just perhaps I could just ask. We are nearing the end, as you say, but in terms of any challenges to adoption that you've seen.
Mm. I think the challenges, and we've seen it there in the initial survey, and I think this
Mm,
is where we're not in a different road than I think we were with RBM and RBQM 10 years ago, right? Is in my view, the regulation space is a little bit unknown. we've all been there, and I think we'll always be there, and we can't always look for a prescriptive. So for me, I think kind of being comfortable with being uncomfortable, but staying with the principles. And thanks for kind of bringing them up at the end. And this is kind of where I like the principles, is if we think of a principle-based approach to the implementation, is and having the conversations of what that looks like. In my lens, I think that's the way that we can navigate through this. And for me, where I'm happy that we've had the conversation here, and where I think some of the conversations with colleagues go is, in my view, AI is not going away. And as we go through change management in an organization, putting your head in the sand and saying, oh, this is going to blow over, I have a strong suspicion that's not going to happen. It's here, it will be here. So how do we function together, and what does that look like? But playing kind of and ignore it and forget it, in my view, isn't going to happen, right? And I guess maybe to close, the piece that I like AI, and we talked about it here, AI and RBQM, is, to me, AI is actually unlocking, I think, of the pain points that we struggled with RBQM adoption for the last 10 years. And that's kind of where, and we talked about at the beginning, was just doing a risk assessment at the beginning. I think we are able to overcome so many hurdles that we have just run into on why teams say no. I think AI is a great tool for that. And what I loved in those principles is a risk-based approach. I think it just continues to reiterate ICHE 6R3 in everything. Is a risk proportionate approach. So that's why I'm excited for AI and RBQM, is because hopefully with this, we can actually achieve the outcomes that we've been all trying to push for the last 10 years.
That's great, Brian. I've learned so much from you today, and I hope others have as well, and enjoyed the conversation, sort of thinking of AI as a teammate, and that's the importance of the iterative approach. It's not like, as an interesting point you make about, it's not like a Google prompt that you put your question in and then you get a bunch of responses back. It's much more a sort of, at least these types of AI, large language models, are much more of a sort of a conversation, rather than just there it is, and here's the response. So thank you very much, Brian, for all your insights today. I can see there's a couple of other questions that have come in. Oh, good. Someone's saying I need to dip my toe into the AI pond. That's great. That's what we. So you've
Just
already made a difference.
Don't dip
Brian.
your toe. You just got to jump.
There's a question: how does Syntegrity use AI for your RBQM platform? Well, this month is AI month for Syntegrity. So we've actually got an Act-On, thank you, as an Act-On QBD session, which is in 2 weeks' time, where we're going to be looking at this Syntegrity platform and the use of AI within this Syntegrity platform. And Artem next week, so the CEO of Syntegrity, is speaking at ACDM in Berlin on an AI trial. So that's another one. If you're there, please do make sure you attend that. I think that's next Tuesday. Tamara, I've probably stolen your thunder with that.
Yes, you did, absolutely. At all, you've done a great job, thank you. I just also wanted to mention that at the My RBQM Academy, I'm just developing, together with Keith and other colleagues, an on-demand training on the application of AI in the GCP world of clinical trials. Keith, I think that's also worth mentioning it, because
Definitely.
we will launch it soon. It will be a certified on-demand training course. And yes, of course, I will keep everyone informed as soon as it comes out. No?
That's great.
It's the month of AI and Syntegrity. And as you already said here, Artem's session at the ACDM, then our sister workshop, the Act on Quality by Design, again with the AI topic. But then also the mindsON sessions on RBQM, not to forget. Okay. Yeah, well, what an interesting workshop. Great. Thank you very much, Brian, and thank you very much, Keith. To our participants, I will send you the recording of today's session that comes tomorrow then. And yeah, there will be plenty of opportunities to join us again, and we look forward to your participation. To see you again then. Many thanks, everyone, and see you again soon. Have a nice rest of the day.
Thanks, everyone. Goodbye. Thanks again, Brian.
Bye.